Today's VGC competitive overview is an interesting one, and is a Pokemon that I found a lot of success with in the first Scarlet and Violet format, and that Pokemon is Camerupt. Now, Camerupt is a fire and ground type, which is one of those kind of ridiculously offensive typings. Featuring 8 super effectives, there's not a monotype that resists both of these stabs, so you have a very consistent amount of offense onto just about anything. And roughly 48% of Pokemon are actually weak to this, which is a big number. And defensively, it's honestly not bad. It's only weak to 2 typings, though one of those is a 4 times super effective from water, but Camerupt has ways of dealing with that pretty well. I will get to that later. And you are also weak to ground. And the resist spread's pretty good. You resist 5 typings, some of these being relatively common like Fairy, and you are of course immune to electric. This is really one of the kind of high tier typings in the game. As long as you can work around that 4x from water, you're pretty much set, and the offense this Pokemon can deal out is quite high considering how much it can hit super effective. So we're already off to a good start here, but it gets better when we talk about the abilities. There's Magma Armor, that one's really not particularly good, and the hidden abilities also a bit gimmicky. I would not recommend Anger Point, especially when you also have the option of Solid Rock, which reduces super effective damage by 25%. That's going to take that water type 4x and bring it down to a 3x, giving you a higher chance of survival, while the ground type hits are going to be hitting like a 1.5 times, I think. Yeah, I believe that's how that counts. Though even with that great typing and good abilities, when we look at the stats, that's kind of where we run into the weakness of this Pokemon. It doesn't have that great a bulk at only 70 for hit points and defense, and Spadef is 75. The offensive stats are pretty good. It's mixed though, so you have 100 on physical attack and 105 on special attack, so slightly better special offense. And the speed stat is 40, so this doesn't actually have a lot of stats to work with. It is 460 base stat total, which is not high at all, and that is really the big drawback of this Pokemon. And a quick look at that speed stat, how it compares. Glastrier and Amoonguss are slower than it, so in a Trick Room scenario, you're going to have some issues fighting both of those. Even Garganacl and Mudsdale are also slower, as well as Hisuian and Avalok, which I think is fun. But crucially, Therian, Enamorus, and Ursaluna are faster than Camerupt, meaning that in a Trick Room scenario, you can actually get your hits off first against these really strong Trick Room options coming in Regulation D. That's gonna matter a fair bit when we get into the viability of this Pokemon. Now, to showcase the offensive capacity, I have put 252 into both attack and special attack. You most likely would not be doing this. You would probably want to invest in some bulk and just one stat for offense. But this is basically to show that against something like Flutter Mane, if you were running it physical, you could easily one-hit knockout that thing with a Flare Blitz. Though the low bulk on this Pokemon is showing a little bit, because Shadow Balls are guaranteed to hit knockout. But the calcs get really sad when we compare it to Ursaluna. Ursaluna's blowing past the defensive stats of this Pokemon. Even Facade, which is neutrally effective, the Guts variant is just absolutely destroying this thing. That is of course a very offensive build, but it is possible you're going to run into things like that. And that's also not including Terra type. If this was, say, a ground or normal Terra Ursaluna, and it did just so happen to terrestrialize, even without 252 adamant investment in the physical attack, you would still be seeing numbers like this or higher. And Camerupt does not hit that hard back. You do not have a guaranteed 2-hit knockout with Eruption. You won't live any of Ursaluna's hits anyway, so unless you're getting a 1-hit knockout, you're kind of toast. Hopefully you have some redirection, maybe to force an Earthquake, but even then, you don't live the Earthquake either, so it's not looking too good here for our mixed set Camerupt. I'll come back to calcs later in a way that's more favorable to Camerupt, but let's take a look at some of its moveset. Now, I already showcased Eruption as well as Earth Power, Earthquake, and Flare Blitz. But this does get other stab options, mostly on the special side, such as Overheat and Fire Blast, even more traditional Flamethrower, as well as Heat Wave. And you do get Bulldoze for speed control. Why would you ever do that on something this slow? I have no idea. And you also get Fissure, which is not ideal for this Pokemon, just so you know. It also does get Incinerate, which makes for an interesting option. Lava Plume is another interesting option that would work in select scenarios. As for some coverage options, we have Rock Slide and Rock Tomb. There's also Trailblaze, Zen Headbutt. I actually did miss Stomping Tantrum. It does have a pretty good option here in Stomping Tantrum. There's Body Press, Flash Cannon, Iron Head, so you can actually do Steel on both physical and special. There's Heavy Slam, Stone Edge, and even Solar Beam. And if you really wanted to, there's Ancient Power and Rollout. Not the most coverage on this Pokemon, but with fire ground typing, you don't really need coverage. So this does get on the supportive side of things. Growl, Amnesia, Curse, Yawn, Charm, Scary Face. Again, don't know why you would do speed control on something so slow. Sunny Day, Rain Dance Sandstorm, Will-O-Wisp, Stealth Rock, Helping Hand, Stockpile, Spit Up and Swallow, and even Howl. So the moveset is pretty good for the stab options, and it even has a reasonable amount of supportive options. But I want to showcase in damage calcs a Camerupt that I have used on ranked ladder before. So a bit of story time here. At the start of Pokemon Scarlet and Violet's ranked ladder, I was having a hard time coming up with a team that was actually working out for me. I think I made like 4 or 5 different teams that season, and I want to say my win rate was below 50%. I was not doing too well at all. And then a friend of mine gave me a rental code for their team that they did exceptionally well with. Their win rate was like over 70% with this team. It was insane. And it was a Trick Room team with Camerupt. Now, it was not just focused around Camerupt, but it also had Torkoal in the team. So it was actually a double Eruption Trick Room team. When I got a hold of this team, I did not lose a match at all with it, actually. It was close to the end of the season, so I only played like 9 games with it, but I did not lose a single game with this rental team that had Camerupt in it. So I'm going to show you the insanity of this particular Camerupt that I was using. So the Camerupt I had access to was a 252 special attack Life Orb Camerupt with Fire Terra type. And you might think, Life Orb doesn't synergize very well with Eruption, but Charcoal was already on Torkoal, so the only other option for additional special offense was like Choice Specs. And this Pokemon had other options as well. It had Protect. I want to say it might have had Yawn at one point, and I think he switched it over to Heat Wave at some point. I'll just put Heat Wave on there instead to showcase the damage that it can do with that. And as you can see, the offense is actually pretty good with Eruption, and even with Earth Power into this Flutter Mane, you have a guaranteed to hit knockout. So in a Trick Room scenario, you can actually just straight up fight a Flutter Mane and beat it. Though your matchup into Ursaluna still looks really bad currently. But let's take a closer look at the scenario here. The way the team was set up, if your opponent did not have any priority moves, you would not bring the answer to priority, which was Serena, and instead you bring Torkoal Camerupt to have that very nice double Eruption in the back. Meaning, when Camerupt was out, Sun was out. And as you can see, now we're getting into some very nice damage into Ursaluna using that Eruption. But this was Fire Terra. The thing is, you had to not only deal with Torkoal's Eruption, you also had to deal with Camerupt's Eruption. Camerupt has a considerably higher special attack stat than Torkoal, and Life Orb of course gives it even more damage on that initial hit. This double Eruption setup literally blew past anything that did not have Wide Guard. It was absolutely insane. And as you can see, this is now a major threat to Ursaluna, and it being slower than Ursaluna, it just knocks it out quick without any retaliation from Ursaluna. And you know, Ursaluna's pretty bulky. It has 80 Spadef. I have a tick up in that, and 130 base hit points. This is one of the bulkier Pokemon out there, so you'd have to run like a defensive Terra on Ursaluna to live this and live it comfortably. So if we did run, say, Water Terra type, Here we can see it's still a guaranteed 2-hit knockout. The thing is, if you combine that with Torkoal's hit as well, that still could possibly knock out Ursaluna even through a defensive Terra. And that's the thing I found really effective about the double eruption Trick Room team, is defensive Terra types did not save you from 2 150 base power eruptions coming from very offensive Pokemon in Sunlight. And I needed to showcase that because that's what I know of Camerupt, is running it in a double eruption team, and it is honestly very effective in that kind of setup. You have to make a full committal Trick Room team to really make that work, so you can have 2 Trick Room setters for maximum consistency, as well as a way to handle priority moves. You need a threatening enough lead that not only sets up Trick Room very easily, but also scares your opponent into trying to get knockouts on what's led. Which I'll have to showcase that team at some point. I found it to be surprisingly well thought out. And of course, whenever I got a hold of it, I was winning every game that I played with it. It was so easy to use. And that's the optimal scenario for Camerupt, is putting it in a double eruption team and just forcing incredibly high amounts of offense that your opponent cannot eat without wide guard. And even then, you run a single target move like Earth Power or even Flamethrower to get some very nice single target offense. And you're still going to be able to take out a wide guard user that way. But this setup is not flawless. It does struggle against Armor Rogue, because those are typically Grass Terra type, which ground does not hit very well, and thanks to Flash Fire, your fire type hits are not going to work either. So in those scenarios, you kind of have to work around outplaying your opponent, hopefully taking out Armor Rogue before you start trying to sweep with your fire in the back. I believe the Hariyama was Dark Terra type to answer that thing. So that team did have ways around it, but outside of that one team that I've used that made very good use of Camerupt, Camerupt does not get full potential without having the rest of the team kind of set it up. So putting this in like a Sun team, its eruptions are absolutely insane as far as offense goes. But if you're just running this in a more normal Trick Room team, it's not really going to have the same threatening potential, and you're just stuck with something that doesn't have that great of stats, which is kind of the problem. And I've, of course, seen the potential of Camerupt. I think it's definitely viable. Even in Regulation D, I think it's still viable. Even if there's more offensive threats in Trick Room, that may be kind of an issue, especially if the Ursaluna has a lot of special defense investment. It might actually live 2 eruptions with a defensive Terra type, and then of course the Earthquake's gonna one-hit both your Camerupt and your Torkoal. So there is that to kind of worry about. But for a team that's not ready for double eruption, Camerupt Torkoal combo sweeps, and it sweeps exceptionally well. As for other potential use cases for Camerupt, I really don't know what else you would do with it besides running it in a double eruption team, because it doesn't synergize very well with pretty much anything else. Its typing's great though, if you need it for coverage. I'm just not entirely sure what you need this Pokemon specifically to cover, considering it's not good stats, but it's definitely viable. I would put this somewhere in like the B/C tier area. I know I put a lot of Pokemon in that area, but that's because there's so many Pokemon in this game that in very specific teams, they're really strong. And Camrupt's one of those, where if the team is just built for it and built just right, it can get set up to wreck somebody's day with those Terra boosted eruptions. Even with Life Orb, it's just ridiculous amounts of damage the second time as well, because Life Orb is not lowering eruptions damage enough to suddenly make it not worth clicking again. But I might have to dig up that old team if I still have it as a rental and test it out some more, because it's probably the maximum potential you can get out of Camerupt, I think. They need to be revised for Regulation D though. But anyway, bit of a different take here on the viability, because when I was having a hard time winning matches, I was able to just steamroll the ladder with Camerupt. So I'm well aware of its potential, and I do think it is a Pokemon that's been slept on too much. But anyway, if there's a Pokemon you want me to cover for competitive speculation or competitive overview, such as Camerupt, let me know down in the comments below. If you like the video, do the YouTube algorithm fun stuff down below, you know, the likes and whatever. And thank you so much for watching. I'll see y'all next time.